Okay, so my name is Ty Carlson. I am the lead front-end developer at Datebox. If you haven't heard of Datebox, it is a local startup. We are working towards providing resources for couples to strengthen their relationship. Our main product is a date night in a box that we send you every month. So just a way that you can be intentional about having a date night with your significant other. What I want to talk a little bit about tonight is just one of the projects that I've been working on in my last couple of months since I started at Datebox is building out a design system. And so these will just be kind of some tips that I have worked through on that project. So tips for building out a design system or pattern library or style guide or whatever your favorite blog is calling it this week. But essentially it's just a collection of visual components, vocabulary, code conventions that you use to make sure that your design is cohesive across all of your products in your company. First tip, just remember that a design system is dynamic. It's going to be changing. You're going to have new features. It's going to be in flux. And so with that, the first thing that you should build when you start working on this is a process for how to make those changes. That can be as simple as just making sure that it is a Git repo and you're making pull requests, or you can have something that's a lot more formal. But just make sure you have that groundwork on how you're going to make changes moving forward, because you will need to make changes. You'll have bugs or new features, like I said. And also, like, prioritize your design system as its own product, or it will die or will become ineffective. What that means is dedicate sprint tasks to it. Dedicate entire dev cycles to maintaining and managing the design system, or else it will just end up being useless. Next tip is to control your colors. I'm a big advocate of making sure that every color that makes its way into a design system is predefined up front. The way that a lot of myself and a lot of other front-end developers have done this is by assigning your hex values to variables. That way you can use them across your code, but that ends up creating variable hell, where you have a variable named brand primary alt light, which means nothing and is completely useless and you can never remember it. This process that I am currently implementing, I stole from Shopify, but it is creating a SAS map of all of your colors. It's just a basic key value pair, just like an array or hash or whatever you're used to doing. But you set up your main colors. I like to do a 2 shades lighter, 2 shades darker, your base and your text color. And then you can create a SAS function. I named it just color. You pass in your main color, and then whichever tint of it you want, it'll return that hex value. Where this really gets fun is the bottom right example, where I can then loop over that array and automatically create variations for my components like buttons. So anytime I add a new color into my color array, it automatically generates that button color for me as well. And there's tons of other examples of how you can use that, but that's just an example. Next tip is to separate your spacing. Vertical spacing is going to kill you. As you start like locking up these different components together into layouts, you're going to run into something like this, where you have a nice heading and then you want some space in between your content below it. And as soon as I write H1 with a margin bottom of 1.5 ren, my designer is going to do this and just screw everything up because that spacing is now going to be messed up. So I am moving towards just completely ripping out all of my vertical spacing from the components themselves and moving towards utility classes. Utility classes meaning just like single one-off classes that do a very specific thing, like MB1 or MB7, meaning margin bottom 1 in the first element in my spacing scale, or margin bottom 7, the last element. So tachyons is a good resource for this. It's just like pushing forward with that utility class idea. I'm not locked into completely using that for everything, but these vertical spacing ones are great. So create a spacing scale, dynamically build those classes that you need, and then just add your spacing in your markup as you go. It'll make things a ton easier. And the last tip, give your teammates the best tools to do their job. And what I mean by that is, for developers, is just to document everything. In the development side of things, that's kind of obvious, but front end, that doesn't make as much sense. CSS used to be super simple. You didn't really need to document anything unless you were fixing some stupid IE bug. Nowadays, with preprocessors, SAS lists, that kind of things, you're writing more complex functions and mix-ins, and you want to make it easy for your next developer to understand what you're doing when they come in. For designers, provide them real working production ready code. I'm not a believer that every designer needs to code their own stuff, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't give them the resources to do so if they wanted to. So as your design system is probably, if you're making it be its own product, it's probably going to have an actual like web property somewhere. Give them a visual of what a component looks like and the HTML to make it happen underneath of it. And you might be surprised by your random print designer that is mocking up web layouts. That's all that I had. 5 minutes goes very quickly. Thank you. If you have any questions, we have a few minutes for those. Yeah. I mean, there's the question, if I just repeat it so everybody can hear it, is does the design system use any other sort of framework? I personally don't like baking in a framework into my design system. The design system kind of is essentially its own tiny little bootstrap or tiny foundation. I mean, personally for this one, I'm using the Bourbon and Neat grid just because it's a nice, simple, easy to use grid. There's no reason to kind of rewrite that, but yeah, I mean, it goes either way, and you can do whichever one. I do not currently. I've only been at Datebox for a couple of months, but we do have, like I said, the process in place for how to do that. But for right now, we're just kind of tackling bugs or fixes as they come. But that is a great idea to just kind of go ahead and bake that into our schedule to address it. I have a communications degree. I finished the degree and realized it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I have always been like interested in tech stuff. I actually interviewed for a job without knowing any HTML or CSS and got the job. I bought a CSS book and read it that week and was pumped out some really terrible websites for a few months, but then just kind of move forward from there. Yeah, so the question was, does this work with React or Angular, any kind of front-end framework? And this will actually be the last question. I have found that, yes, it absolutely works just fine. With React, it's a little bit different because you're like writing all of your HTML code in JavaScript, but you still have classes and you still, like, it's still essentially the same thing. So I think React Native would probably be a little bit different. But with React, you can absolutely use it. I have zero experience with Angular, so can't answer that side of it. But that was the last question. Thank you guys very much.